Hey folks, I'm JC, and this channel is all about how to run fantastic one-shot adventures and short campaigns. And today, we're going to sail far into the Pacific to a mysterious island covered in fog and storms, an island home to the king of titans himself, Kong. That's right, today I'm going to be reviewing Kong's Skull Island, Sliver of the Skull. Okay, that's a mouthful, but it's a pulpy action adventure for the Everyday Heroes RPG. If you haven't played Everyday Heroes, that's fine, I'll give you a quick overview. Everyday Heroes is a new modern-day RPG based on the older, very popular D20 modern system, but refreshed so that players of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition will find it familiar. Basically, Everyday Heroes gives you very familiar game mechanics, but tuned for action-adventure games. And I think this is great, because if you're going to run a one-shot adventure for your friends, it really helps if they're already familiar with the game system you're running. Think about it. If you only have a few hours to entertain your friends with gaming, the last thing you really want to do is spend half of that time explaining rules to your group. So a game like Everyday Heroes serves a wonderful purpose because you can just hand your players a character sheet and they'll immediately understand like 80% of the rules. Oh, on a personal note, and this is just my own windmill to tilt at, I like that Everyday Heroes avoids one of the most common pit traps that modern D20 games suffer from, and that is most of them treat guns as just another bow and arrow in the game. Like they all do D8 or D10 damage and they have short ranges, and that means that your firefights just play out like a fantasy battle. You're whittling away hit points, firing guns at thugs, and I just don't find that that feels like a modern action-adventure movie. I want to feel like John Wick and gun down thugs in 1 or 2 shots. And what I find that Everyday Heroes does that's pretty cool, and actually ranks it as probably my favorite of the D20 modern RPGs, is that it gives guns not only decent damage, but gives them armor penetration, making them way better than bows and clubs and that sort of thing. And it gives them special abilities, so like you can fire bursts that automatically hit bad guys who aren't taking cover. It all starts to feel a lot more like a modern action movie, not just a reskinned fantasy combat. So if that sounds cool to you, you should check this game out. When Everyday Heroes launched, it took an unusual approach with its adventure supplements. They were all based on popular action movies. And this was a curious approach, but one that I think is pretty cool because it gives gamers settings that they're already familiar with. You can just rope your players into an adventure by saying that you're familiar with the system and you probably know a lot about this setting. It makes it so easy to grab players and run them through something new. And Everyday Heroes supplements included everything from classics like Highlander and The Crow to newer movies like Pacific Rim and Kong Skull Island. I am a huge fan of King Kong, going back to the original 1930s black and white movie, which I used to watch on the couch as a kid with my mom, the gloomy 1970s remake, the Peter Jackson version, and especially the new Skull Island movie, a movie that I felt really captured the primordial dangers of Kong's island home really well. The place is just alive with vicious monsters, deadly flora, and other horrifying surprises. In other words, it's the perfect place for an RPG. Or is it? You see, over the years, so many adventures have taken inspiration from Kong's Skull Island. The original D&D Isle of Dread is basically Skull Island with the serial numbers filed off. Conan's Waves Stained Crimson, another one of my favorite more recent adventures, steals from Skull Island a lot, and so does Call of Cthulhu's popular Two-Headed Serpent RPG. So, will an authentic licensed Skull Island feel fresh and original to today's gamers? Or is it just going to feel like just another jungle adventure with a giant ape at its center? Well, grab your safari hat and get ready for some Titan-sized spoilers, because not only am I going to give you a full review of Kong Skull Island Sliver of the Skull, I'm going to give you GM some tips and tricks on how to run it like a pro. Sliver of the Skull is written by Michael Bromnick and Ivis K. Flanagan. The book includes backstory on the island, its monstrous inhabitants, and equipment that you might use to explore it. But I'm going to focus on the adventure Sliver of the Skull, which runs about 40 pages and is the length of about half the book. As a disclaimer, while I did back the Everyday Heroes Kickstarter myself, the good folks at Evil Genius Games heard that I was a huge King Kong fan, and they sent me the Skull Island supplement. I received this product for free to review, but this video is not sponsored and I wasn't paid or directed to give a specific opinion. All thoughts on this game are my own and based on my honest playthrough as a GM of it. I was able to get through Sliver of the Skull in a single 4-hour session, but the players I played with are pretty decisive. I think most groups will probably take closer to 2 sessions to get through this one. It also includes 5 third-level pre-generated characters, which is a nice touch and means that you can start playing right away. Sliver of the Skull takes place in 2014, about 40 years after the Skull Island movie, which was set in the 70s. The adventure runs across 3 acts. The setup is this. The players are employees of Monarch, a secret scientific organization that studies titans, kaiju like Godzilla and King Kong. If you've watched any of the MonsterVerse movies or the excellent Apple TV Monarch show, you'll recognize this organization. The heroes are stationed on a vessel outside of Skull Island when they pick up a weird disturbance coming from a nearby unidentified ship. A strange signal is chasing away the marine life, causing a lot of chaos, and Monarch needs to investigate. However, a hurricane is picking up. The island, of course, is surrounded in storms and fog and that sort of thing, so the players are hurried away and sent on a little motorboat to the vessel, which is named the Compass Rose. And they have to find out what's going on and then hole up on the ship until the storm subsides. When the PCs arrive at the Compass Rose, they'll see that the power is out and the ship seems abandoned. Boarding the vessel, the players soon discover there's blood everywhere, the ship is flooding, and something horrible has just happened. Also, the ship isn't actually abandoned at all. It's been taken over by a small handful of mercenaries who are working for a rival biotech company. As the players explore the ship, they discovered that this biotech company was experimenting with a strange white fungus. They were using it to try to control and weaponize the creatures of Skull Island. The fungus infected some of the Skull Island animals that were on board as test subjects, like a big scur buffalo, this like monstrous buffalo, who actually seems unaffected by the fungus, but also a terrifying death jackal, who's grown armored spikes and has turned extra aggressive. Death jackals are already this crazy cross between a velociraptor and like a tiger, so extra aggressiveness is going to cause some real problems for the PCs. Act 1 and Act 2 are all set on board the Compass Rose, and they kind of blend together. There's a lot for the players to juggle. As soon as they arrive on the boat, the PCs have to repair the boat to stop the flooding, rescue some surviving crew, figure out what that weird jamming signal is, deal with several well-armed mercenaries and their crazy leader, and there's that vicious death jackal stalking the corridors, so it's a lot.
Well, that's a lot to ask. As an original member of the Skull Island expedition, all we had to deal with was stop-motion dinosaurs and an occasional giant ape!
It is a lot, and I found that all of that stuff was a little too chaotic and overwhelming for the players. I mean, I like it when players have choices and there's more stuff to do than they can possibly get to, but that's just a lot of events to have happen as soon as the players board the boat. My players just ended up focusing on surviving and just deprioritized the investigation and story and concentrated on killing the mercenaries and that death jackal. And that was a little unfortunate because there is a good story here of what happened to the crew, but your players may ignore that in favor of surviving all the things that are attacking them. To make this opening a little bit less frenzied, I recommend making some tweaks to the first 2 acts here. The players board the Compass Rose on deck 3, where the cargo holds are, which contain that scur buffalo, the surviving crew, and most of the mercenaries. I said that the flooding triggered the watertight doors to the upper parts of the ship. The doors prevent the players from going upstairs until the power's back on. So this gives them 2 decks to explore, the cargo holds and the engine room where they can get to work on the repairs. But they still have to deal with the mercenaries trapped down there with the surviving crew, who's happy to be rescued, and fill the players in on what happened and help them with any repairs. And once the power's back on, the players can open up those watertight doors, and then I have the mercenary captain, a woman named Kai, who's barricaded herself on the bridge, call them on the radio and demand that the players bring up Catherine Pierce, the lead scientist of the biotech group. She wants this scientist because the sonic jammer on the boat, the thing causing those weird signals and disturbing the marine life, is about to run out of power and fail. And when it does, the ship's gonna get swarmed by aggressive shocker squids who are infected with the fungus. Even on Skull Island, there be no such thing as a giant shocker squid. But Catherine isn't with the survivors, which forces the players to search the upper decks to find her. And that's where they discover the escaped death jackal along with Catherine's half-eaten corpse and her laptop, which has more clues on what happened with the ship's experimentation. I just find that using watertight doors to kind of split up the boat between Act 1 and Act 2 just helps the players prioritize a little better, get to all the cool stuff, but still gives them agency. The adventure includes some handout material for a science journal the players can find, as well as Catherine's audio logs that they find on the laptop. But they're not real handouts, they're just not really suited great for players, they're just really described in text in the middle of the adventure. So when I ran Sliver of the Skull, I went crazy and above and beyond, and I created some video logs along with a real handout for that science journal. Check the link in the description below if you want to use these. But basically, the logs all sum up the fact that Janos Biotech, this rival company, has created this fungus to try to control Skull Island's dangerous animals. It failed, turned some of them hyper-aggressive, and when the captain just dumped the cargo holds into the ocean, it infected some of the marine life around them. And Catherine and her scientists built some kind of jammer to keep that aggressive marine life away from the ship, which is in danger of failing any minute now. Once the players deal with that mercenary leader Kai, the sonic jammer just runs out of juice and the ship is overwhelmed by those shocker squids, these big, nasty electrical squids. And the boat is getting dragged by the powerful currents around Skull Island and is being pulled towards the beaches. So the PCs have to batten down the hatches and do their best to prepare for landfall. Act 2 ends with the players washing ashore on Skull Island. They have to re-establish communications with Monarch and then trudge through the jungle to a nearby Monarch outpost. The adventure says that the outpost is only a 30-minute walk away from the beach, but I say, no, this is Skull Island. It's supposed to be horrifying and dangerous and a wild place, so it's no fun washing ashore on a beach and then strolling 30 minutes away to a safe camp. Instead, unless you're on a tight timeline, just make your players survive a whole day and night in the jungle to get to that outpost. Pick one of those weird creatures from the appendix to have the PCs encounter, like those mother longlegs that resemble a giant bamboo forest but will actually impale players if they get too close. Have the crew that's accompanying the PCs get picked off one by one or get themselves in trouble again and again. Force the players to find fresh water, which is home to giant piranha. It doesn't matter. I think that this adventure is in too much of a hurry to kind of move the plot along and doesn't take a moment to let the players really sink in that they got stranded on Skull Island and they're in trouble. So go ahead and insert some stuff there. It'll make the adventure feel a lot better. The adventure does describe an encounter in the jungle with the iwi, natives of the island. They've killed a snare hunter, basically a giant ant, who has been eating the fungus-infected meat from the dead shocker squids that washed up on the beach. Now, weirdly, the iwi are super helpful and automatically lead the PCs to a tree, and they show them how they can use the sap to alleviate the infection. I found this encounter to be a little out of place. The iwi kind of felt like video game NPCs who were just standing around with a cure to give the players.
Ill Traveler. Do you require healing herbs for your journey?
I leave the dead ant there, but I skip the iwi encounter for now. Stay tuned on how I use that later. Act 3 begins when the players arrive at the outpost. Monarch is seriously worried that those snare hunters, the big ants, are spreading the fungal infection, especially since the ants live in tunnels and nests with thousands of them. They need to find a cure for that infection fast. Now, if your players have paid attention to the plot so far, they'll remember from the logs of the ship that the Skur buffalo are immune to the fungus. So they'll need to get a blood sample from one, which is going to require some great animal handling finesse not to get trampled to death by a giant buffalo. And here's where I have the Monarch scientists mention that the iwi are masters of herbal medicine. They just know a lot about the island and its plants, and they may recognize the fungus. So another option is for the PCs to travel to an iwi settlement in the hopes of getting information from the natives. Now your players get more agency, they have a choice to make, and if they survive the trek to new territory, which is another opportunity to use some of those crazy creatures from the appendix, they can be diplomatic with the iwi who can show them the special tree sap that can help with the fungal infection. Either way, the PCs now have a cure for the infection. To test it, Monarch asks the PCs to drive over to a snare hunter nest and hit an ant with a dart filled with the serum, see if it works. I decided this was too easy, and instead I said that Monarch needed the PCs to bring back one or two of the smaller infected ants alive, which meant that the players had to get up close and personal with one of those nests, fight off the bigger guardians, and then drag one or two of those smaller forager ants into their jeep, toss them in, and race out of there. That's just a lot more fun than just shooting an ant from the distance with a dart and watching what happens. This approach turned out to be a really fun action scene for my players as they were trying to drag an ant back to the jeep with a whole swarm of snare hunters charging after them. It felt like Starship Troopers. It was really fun, so give that a try. However, as soon as the PCs disrupt that snare hunter colony, the ground shakes and a massive, and I mean massive, snare hunter queen, a titan over 100 feet in length, bursts from the ground and into the air. She's infected and angry. And worse, King Kong himself has taken her appearance as a challenge, and now he's trudging his way through the jungle to fight her. Monarch is terrified that Kong will get overwhelmed by this hyper-aggressive queen, or even infected himself. They urge the PCs to help. Now, of course, their puny weapons won't hurt that big queen at all, but she's accompanied by a swarm of giant flying ants, which will give her an edge over Kong. So the final scene of this adventure takes place as the PCs board an Osprey helicopter plane and fly above the two battling titans, dogfighting and shooting down flying ants with miniguns. They need to defeat the swarm so that Kong can kill the infected queen. It's a pretty epic finish, and I like that the adventure even includes some additional cinematic vehicle rules to give the players a chance to all participate and up the drama as the Osprey takes damage. Those ants can tear wings off the plane, or when I ran it, one of those flying ants crashed through the cockpit, critically hit the pilot and scissored his head right off.
Don't worry, boys and girls, I'm a hotshot pilot. There ain't nothing taking this plane down. Yeah!
Now that's the way to die on Skull Island. And by defeating the swarm and keeping them off Kong, Kong rips the head off of the snare hunter queen, declares victory, and heads back into his home deeper in Skull Island. And that's Sliver of the Skull. So what do I think? I think Sliver of the Skull is a pretty solid adventure. It succeeds on a lot of levels, but it does miss the mark on a few. I like that it's fast-paced and never leaves the players wondering what their objective is. They're thrust from one dangerous situation to another, but they can use their brains as much as their firearms in almost all of those situations. For example, on the Compass Rose, my players turned into a Tom Clancy Rainbow Six squad. They were jumping from corridor to corridor, being very tactical, sniping mercenaries, and they did great. But another group could just as easily talk the mercenary captain to give up control of the boat, or just forget about that and focus on repairing the ship and maybe sealing the bad guys in different sections of the boat. And the same thing holds true once the players get to Skull Island. All of the challenges can be approached in very different ways, a violent way and often a peaceful way. I also like that the adventure gives different player types moments to shine. When I GM this, the medic, the sniper, and the pilot all had great moments in the adventure. No one character could hog the spotlight. And that's often difficult to pull off in modern adventures because there's more overlap between character classes versus fantasy ones. I also like that there are some genuinely creepy moments in the adventure, although the GM has to work to play them up a bit more. Being stalked by a death jackal on the boat can be scary, it could be like an alien movie, but it's important that the GM ups the paranoia the players feel once they get onto that dark boat. Describe the pitch blackness with only blinking computer monitors flickering to light the way. Maybe the PCs hear partially complete audio logs playing in pieces in the distance, along with the moans of that trapped scur buffalo in the cargo hold. And then, only once the players have found some of the files on the computers that describe what's happened here, then you have the death jackal appear, ambushing the first PC who separates from the group. Play the death jackal smart and viciously, and this part of the adventure will just creep and scare your players. Now, the adventure doesn't describe exactly how to do that, but if you play it out like I described, it's going to make it that much more effective. My criticisms of this adventure are twofold. First, for an adventure that wants to sell the players on how awesome it is to adventure on Skull Island, well, less than half the adventure takes place on the island. Most of it takes place on a boat, and that's fun, but I think most players who sit down and want to play this want to be on the island as quickly as possible. And secondly, once the players arrive on the island, they're hurried along without much time to explore it and feel the horrifying dangers of the place. Skull Island is such a great setting in all of the Kong movies because the heroes lose control once they arrive. They're surrounded by prehistoric creatures, lost tribes, and extreme wilderness hazards. But in Sliver of the Skull, the players have a lot of control once they arrive. They're well outfitted, they have military equipment, they're only 30 minutes or so from a base camp full of friendly scientists, and nothing really goes bad until the very end. But even then, once the giant queen appears, she's more bad for Kong than it is for the players, and they have a plane full of miniguns to deal with it. So I think by giving the players so much control over the environment, the adventure doesn't totally capture the magic of Skull Island that I would want. But, like I pointed out in the review above, this can be fixed with a little creative GMing. Just strand your players a day or two from that base camp. Have them unsure of its exact location. Maybe their GPS broke and the only NPC who has one freaks out and runs off into the jungle. Make them face some of those weird dangers in the wilds. Whittle down their hit points and have them learn to respect the island. And then once they arrive at base camp, have it be this pathetic little outpost that is so badly damaged by recent attacks, it just doesn't have much equipment to give the players. And the more you can just make your players desperate in that last act, the better this adventure will play. But in the end, if you're looking for a fun action-adventure one-shot, especially one that shows off the Everyday Heroes rule set, then check out Kong Skull Island. If you enjoyed this review and want to see more like it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon. Also, if you want me to review more Everyday Heroes cinematic supplements, then go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Also talk about if you've happened to play this game, how did it go for your group? Until next time, I'm JC, and just remember, if your character dies on Skull Island by getting his head scissored off by a giant flying ant, just high-five all the other players. That's an awesome way to go on Skull Island.